What is your I survived story? I fell sick for about a week. Couldn't eat or drink anything without it coming back up. Unbearable cramps to the point I couldn't walk. My mum thought it was menstrual things until one night I was vomiting acid and things just stopped. Like everything stopped hurting and I felt this ease come over me. My mom comes in and immediately panics. I guess I was white, and my eyes were lifeless, but I felt so at peace. We rushed to the hospital. They took 9 hours to see me. At this point nurses and doctors kept trying to keep me awake but I just wanted to sleep. They ended putting me under and next thing you know I'm awake. And I woke up screaming. They said it was impossible for me to have made it as far as I did. This was 11 years ago. It was my appendix, it had ruptured the final night when things felt peaceful, so I was in sepsis at that point. I am a flight instructor. The first 500 hours of flight is called the killing zone. However, many flight instructors are hired right out of flight school, 190 hours to 250 hours depending on the path. I had maybe 200 hours at the time. I flew into a small dark cloud that was obviously a thunderstorm. Completely dumb thing to do. Within seconds, ice built up on my wings and propeller. Next thing I knew, I was falling out of the sky. Wings with ice on them no longer fly, nor did my propeller offer any power. My attitude indicator had tumbled, I had no idea of attitude, and my turn coordinator was beyond standard rate turn. Altimeter was circling fast, like 500 feet per second. We broke out of the clouds maybe 500 feet above the ground, nose down, and I was able to recover within 100 feet of crashing into the ground. I was training Chinese students at the time, and after that, they were scared of any weather. This happened to me and my wife 2 weeks ago. We're on my motorcycle, wearing helmets, stopped with our signal on and displaying hand signals to turn left into our neighborhood. We had sat there for about 10 seconds when an SUV, driver texting, plowed through us at 55 miles per hour. Spent a week in the hospital and another week in rehab. I'm tied to a walker and the wife is wheelchair bound and will be for some time. It's amazing to consider how we survived. Very thankful to be here. We're finally home and it's going to be a long road. Luckily I work from home. Was out hiking in my woods. Saw a dead tree that looked rotten and ready to fall across the trail. So I gave it a shove so that it would fall away from the trail. It started falling, the trunk shattered on the side, and it was suddenly falling sideways. Hit another tree, bounced directly back at me. Had just enough time to take a single step to the side as several hundred pounds of tree slammed into the ground right next to me, enough that I felt the ground shake. Would have squished me like a grape had it hit. When I was 7, my parents started dating this guy. He was a textbook abuser, to put it short. To cut the chase, one night in 2012 he got drunk as fuck and got a knife. He started screaming and stuff, saying stuff about how he's gonna kill my parent and I, how he's gonna leave me with her corpse and stuff. The neighbors heard, and somehow managed to get in and keep him locked in the living room. He stabbed the door numerous times. Anyway, we managed to get out and stayed at my parents' friend's house while the police was called. That's pretty much the only thing I remember, aside from the fact that that day was also the first time I had experienced a panic attack. It feels weird, if the neighbor hadn't heard him or hadn't managed to keep him locked in there, I'd have been dead. When I was 6, my mom, brother, neighbor, and her son all took a trip to the beach. On our way back, we were driving on the highway at about 75 miles per hour. I was in the car with my neighbor and her son. My mom was in the car behind her with my brother and his friend. Side note, my mom and my neighbor were having an affair. My mom had filed for divorce 6 months prior to this event. My neighbor turns around to ask us what kind of ice cream we wanted at the next stop. Two 16-year-olds were driving drunk on the opposite side of the highway. They came flying across the median and hit our car head-on, going over 100 miles per hour. Our SUV flipped over and over and over again. It was a crunched-up mess by the time it came to a stop. My mom watched the whole thing. Both of the boys who hit us were killed on impact. My neighbor died. My neighbor's son had a fractured skull, broken ribs, broken arms, both broken legs. He had to use a wheelchair and had pins in his legs for over a year. Apparently, my mum pulled over and pulled me out of the car. I was knocked out, and had blood all over me. She thought I was dead. Then I woke up and started crying hysterically. I was fine. I wore my seatbelt because I wanted them to think I was responsible. Since I was so small, and wore my seatbelt, all that happened to me was a fracture in my skull, by my eye. On August 4th, 20 years had passed since the crash. My mom texted me and said that today marks 20 years since I was given back to her. Had minor surgery, was prescribed pain meds but not told the brand name of the meds upon discharge from hospital. Got my period and it was extremely heavy and would not stop after 10 days. Went to urgent care, passed out in lobby and found out my iron level was so low I had an extreme case of blood loss anemia. Had to get 2 blood transfusions and spend a few days in hospital. Turned out they had given me Aleve, which is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug and not supposed to be combined with Ilakese, blood thinner, which I was also on. DRS didn't understand how I had still been walking around before I passed out. I ate sushi at a janky Chinese buffet. I remember the tuna roll was warm. Less than 3 hours later I was sick to my stomach and couldn't stop shivering. I'm sitting at work and people were just asking me if I was okay. I went home and just curled up in a blanket, shivering. Now, to add difficulty level to this, I was effectively homeless at this time. I was building a cabin on land while living in it. No roof, just plastic over the top. Roof was next. It's the middle of December and 7 degrees out. And I was. You know those fever dreams where you lose all sense of whether you are awake or not and normal things are suddenly bizarre and bizarre things are suddenly just normal? That was me for 24 hours while I fought off this illness and hypothermia. I think the fever kept me alive. Really. I couldn't even stop the clay pots I called a stove with wood to stay warm. I was too weak to lift the blankets. Anyway, I called into work for the next 2 days and eventually started just sucking it up and going to work. I still felt just as bad but I was used to it. I should also mention I hadn't shit in a week and couldn't eat. Just absolute death's door. I was totally pale, always on the verge of passing out, and freezing no matter what I did. And trying to poop only managed to push out a teaspoon of tar. Finally after a week and a half I asked the girl I had been dating if I could spend a day at her place to stay warm. She knew I was sick and wanted to nurse me to health anyway, so this was a win for her. I used her bathroom that night and after 45 minutes of struggle I finally got a massive black tar out, crap jet black like a rocket ship. This took all my energy, having not eaten hardly for almost 2 weeks, and I barely managed to shower and pass out in her bed butt naked. Called in the next day despite feeling way better because I was so hungry and tired and not interested in working. And that's the story of how I survived food poisoning that I really feel like should have killed me. Back in February of 2010 I fell sick with what I thought was food poisoning and felt like shit for 3 days, started on Monday and had Chinese food the night before. Thursday I went to school feeling better but was unusually thirsty. Midday I started to feel bad again and had my mum come get me. Friday things got much worse, kept vomiting and couldn't keep anything down, food or drink. Saturday was the same but I had lost a lot of weight, fat and muscle mass included. So my dad took me to urgent care by our house and they drew blood and said I had mono and was overreacting. My mother didn't sleep that night and knew something was wrong because I didn't ever get sick. My parents decided to take me to the ER for emergency for fluids due to being severely dehydrated. They went to wake me up around 6 to 6:30 am and found me in a coma. Paramedics get there and one of the standard things to do is check blood sugar, so they did. They thought their meter was broken as it wouldn't read, so when we got to the ER, they checked with one of theirs, same thing, error. So they drew my blood and sent it to the lab. My blood sugar was at 1850. For those that don't know blood sugar levels, 70-130 is normal, 131-160 is normal after eating. Anything above that is hyperglycemia and you're a diabetic. When people develop it, most of the time if your sugar hits 500 plus you die. I was in a coma for 4 days, on life support for 3. The doctors initially told my family to prepare for a funeral. When I started to pull through, they said be prepared to take care of me for the rest of my life, as I will have severe brain damage if I wake up. When I woke up, it felt like a night had passed. I remember the doctor shining a light in my eyes and asking me what the day was. My response: it's Sunday, and get that damn light out of my eyes. Doctor: no. It's Wednesday. Me: bullshit. Surprise. It was Wednesday. My dad happened to be there and said he was glad my sense of humor was still intact. I was told I was a type 2 diabetic shortly after and went into diabetic coma while going through diabetic ketoacidosis. I went from looking like Chris Hemsworth without a shirt on, weighing 235 pounds, to looking like a Holocaust survivor weighing 156 pounds. Scary shit. But today, almost 10 years later, I am 28, healthy, and married to my best friend. She will have her own story soon about how she beat stage 4 osteosarcoma. Just over 5 years ago, I suffered what I later learned was a dissected aortic aneurysm. I woke up at 5 a.m. on a Saturday, and my weekend off no less, with what felt like heartburn, and even though I was annoyed, I went back to sleep, only to wake up another hour later still feeling the burning sensation in my chest. I got up and went to sit on the couch, hoping that sitting up would help it to go away. While I was sitting up, I started to feel weak and began to get lightheaded, so I decided that it was probably more than just heartburn, so I got ready and began to drive myself to the hospital, which was about 30 minutes away. Halfway there, I became too weak to drive, so I pulled over and called 911. Somehow, I had managed to pull over in front of the local fire department, so the ambulance was there in about 2 minutes. As they were checking me over, the driver asked if there was anyone I should call. I told him to call my mother. I arrived at the hospital about 7:15 in the morning. The next few hours are a blur as I was in and out of consciousness. It felt like less than 20 minutes that I was there, but I later learned that it was afternoon before a diagnosis was made. The last thing I remember was the sound of the helicopter starting up as I was loaded in to be taken to the closest major heart trauma surgery center. I would actually find out later that no one had gotten a hold of my parents, and it was in fact the pilot that called my mom. He asked her how long it would take her to arrive, and when she said 3 hours, he just told her, "Oh. Yeah, she still doesn't let me forget that." So, the next thing I know, I wake up in a hospital room. No big deal, that is where I was going, so I expected that. I remember wondering what day it was. I went in on Saturday, and I knew that some time had passed, so I wasn't sure if it was Monday or Tuesday. I was trying to plan in my head when I could go back to work. I also noticed there was a birthday cake drawn on a marker board in the room, and I remember thinking that the person who had the room before me must have had a birthday. My mom came into the room shortly after I woke up, and began explaining to me exactly what was going on. Turns out I had almost died, and had spent the last 6 weeks in a coma. My family was told that there was a less than 5% chance that I would survive, though the surgeon would later tell me that it is closer to a 2% chance. I also found out that I had gotten very lucky with when this happened. The surgeon who saved me was a 30-plus-year veteran of cardiac surgery, and the chief cardiac surgeon of the hospital I was sent to. He just so happened to be the one working that particular weekend. He also told me that I had the worst dissection he had seen in his career. Oh, and that birthday cake, I had woken up on my 32nd birthday. So, yeah, happy birthday to me, I guess.